So we're back. And this is where we left off in the last video. And now we want to light, shade, and render this. But first, I just wanted to show you something that's pretty useful to know. And that is, let's say you have a different version of this scene file where you've done a different animation and you want to copy over that animation to this working file, for example. So in this case, we want to replace this node, essentially. So what we can do is we can take this transform node and just delete it. And then if I navigate to my other working file, and this is the one I did for the intro animation, I can just copy this transform node. And as long as the node name is the same, we can paste it and it automatically connects to that sphere. And then we can just slot it in here. So I thought that was a pretty handy tip that you might find useful. So now we have a different animation where it goes a little bit back and forth and then moves out. All right, so from here, we're going to resim this animation. And this time I'm just gonna drop down a file cache node. And this is the most common way to bake out simulations or animations or any geometry to disk. By default, the base name is set to $hipname.os, but I usually just like to remove the hip name so that it saves it into one single folder. And then I tend to uncheck the hard base name on save. If we don't, this will convert into a absolute path after we cache. But it's totally up to you. I'm not gonna go through all of the settings here, but I just wanted to point that out. And lastly, I'm also gonna reduce the amount of frames that I'm gonna cache to 72 frames. And from here, I can just hit save to disk. So now it will cache, and it's pretty fast because it's a very light simulation. There we go, there's done. So now if I scroll through here, we can see that it is very responsive. What you might want to do as well is to go to this load tab here, click it, and then if you click this box here, you can clamp it to the last frame, so that way it won't go black. All right, I'm gonna check that it's working, and it seems like it is. So now we can head up one level, and we are now on the object context, and this is where we're gonna place our lights and cameras. The thing that I usually tend to do is to create a separate GeoNetwork that I'll use to render. And the reason why is because sometimes I might have multiple streams of geometry built in the same network that I want to separate when rendering. In this scenario, I only have one output, but in order to keep things consistent, let's create a new geometry network. And then I'm gonna rename this to render_scene. And then I'm gonna hit the C key in order to bring up the color palette. And for my render nodes, I'd like to color them green. And then I can hide the build scene, so now we don't see anything. But if we hop into this newly created geometry network, we can append a object merge. And I'm gonna hit Shift W to bring up the tree view. And here I'm gonna grab that build scene network and just drag it in here. Usually it's a good idea to specify the node that you want to view as well. So I know that I want to view the out_geo. Another tip is if you don't want to keep track of things, you can always create a output null. And this will always make sure that we display this node. So even if I go to my cache, for example, and hide up and hide the render node and toggle the build scene, it will still refer to that node. So that's a pretty good thing to know as well. I'm gonna toggle off the display tag on this one, and then I'm gonna toggle the display tag on the render scene node. And then I can hit Shift W to hide the tree viewer. And on this geometry network, I also want to add the object parameters. And in here, since we're instancing, we're going to want to go to the instancing tab and make sure that we have the Redshift point cloud selected. And I'm going to change the instance file mode from Redshift proxies to Houdini compatible objects. And then I'm also going to click this instance sup level packed primitives. And this only applies, I think, at least if you instance with the copy to sup node. If you instance files from disk, I think you normally leave this unchecked. And obviously, if you instance Redshift proxy objects, you would switch to that. Next, we can create some lights. And if you tab and type in RS, you'll see all the Redshift lights that you should be familiar with. So I'm going to click the Redshift light dome, put it here. And if I go to the tab here, we can load a texture. So I'm just going to go to my $jobs folder, go to text. And here I have a HDRI that I'm going to select. I'll want to change the color space from auto to linear Rec 709. So now we have a basic light, and let's set up our render parameters. And the place where we usually set up render properties are going to be in the out context. So here I already have a Redshift ROP, and it is set to a camera that doesn't exist yet, but we'll create that in a second. Here I'm just going to go to the output tab, and then I usually like to remove this hip name again. And $S is a Houdini variable that takes the name of a node. So in this case, we're saying go to the location of the HIP file and then to the folder render and then name it. Well, in this case, it's going to be Redshift ROP1 and then the frame number plus the extension. So I'm going to rename this to Houdini tutorial version 1. And usually what I'll do when I'm on a job and if I'm just designing stuff and pushing out style frames, I like to switch this to JPEG so I don't have to convert the EXR. The only thing that you need to keep in mind though is that you need to go to post effects and check these two boxes here. Otherwise it won't apply the ACES transform. So that out of the way, I'm going to go to my Redshift render settings and I'm going to click advanced, change it from automatic sampling. And let's do 256. And that's usually a pretty good starting point. So now what's left to do is to create a camera. So we can search for camera, drop it down here. And this one also needs some parameters. So we need to click on this cam params with the node selected. And this will add the Redshift shelf to the camera. Now, the way it works in Houdini is a little bit different compared to how it works in Cinema when looking through the camera. So in Cinema, we have this toggle that you can just click and then you can move around and it will update the camera's position. In Houdini, one way to view through the camera is to go to this tab up here and then you can click the camera and then you jump in. But if you start to move around, you can see that the camera is still locked in place. So what you need to do is you need to select your camera and hit this lock button, and now you can move the camera. There's also a shortcut for this, Control plus backslash. But one thing that's a little bit annoying with this approach is if you have a lot of cameras, you might have a hard time like finding the camera that you're looking for. So one tip that I actually learned recently, and I can't believe I didn't know this was a thing, but if you want to jump into a camera, you can just drag and drop your camera into the viewport and then it jumps into it. So now you just need to lock it. So that's super useful. So if you have like multiple cameras, you can just drag, and as long as it's locked, it will stay locked. Big shout out to Espen Oxholm who taught me this trick. I'm also working on a shelf script that automatically can jump into a camera if I select it. So if I create a new camera and then I have a shortcut to trigger the shelf script, so it's Control space. So now if I click a camera, it will jump to that and lock it automatically. And if I click it again, it will unlock. It's a little bit buggy, but you know, it's in development. All right, so we're ready to render. So if we go to our Redshift render viewer, and I'm just going to make a little bit more space here. And I'm going to hit play. And my Houdini crashed. So let this serve as a gentle reminder to always save before you hit that render button. But now we are back and we have a render. And if I go to this cogwheel here, I'm just going to change the view from untone map to ACES. And Houdini does have an autosave function, but it's not checked by default. But you can find it if you go up to edit and then toggle the autosave checkbox here. But we can see that we have our HDRI working and we have something in our viewport that is our object here. But most of the time, I usually don't like to see my HDRI. So I can go to environment here and untoggle the background. And now we won't see that. Another disclaimer. So in the tutorial, I was using an older version of Redshift. So since then, they've moved this background toggle so it doesn't exist anymore. Instead, you'll find it down here in the contribution tab. And if you change the slider to 0, you'll get the same effect. Now back to the tutorial. So let's start by setting up some materials. And the way you set up materials is usually going to be in the matte context. And you could set up your materials here on the global level, but I like to do it on the object level. So I like to create a separate material network. And the reason for it is because this is much easier to copy paste into different scenes and other working files. So I usually keep it this way, but you can do whatever you want. So I'm going to name this 01 so that it comes up highest in the list. And then we can hop in. And we can create a RS material builder. And we can rename this to material. And then I'm going to hop back up to OBJ. And if I hit Shift W to get my tree view back up, we can find our material here. And we can just drag it into material parameter here. So now if we reload, we can see that something happened in our render viewer. I'm just going to hide this thing there. So now we have the material applied. I can hit Shift W to close the tree view again. And yeah, let's set up a shader. So I'm going to hop into our material. And this looks a little bit different, obviously, because it's Houdini, but it should be pretty familiar to how it works in Cinema 4D. It's the same nodes, same namings, so it should be all good. The one thing that you will note, though, is that because Houdini works in meters, some of the sort of scale options, for example, the subsurface might be a little bit different than when you're used to. But usually it's just a matter of scaling it by 10 or 100. But yeah, thought I'd mention that. So the first thing that we can do is to import this color attribute that we have here so that we see it in our Redshift render. And the way you import attributes into Redshift in Houdini is with two nodes. So you have the RS point attribute and you have the RS vertex attribute. In this case, I'm going to use the RS point attribute. So we drop that down, and by default, it's already importing the color data. So we can set this to the base color. And if we reload, we see that now we have colors in our viewport. If I click on this little triangle here, we can see all our inputs. And let's create some roughness and some bump. So we're going to do this with a max on noise. I'm going to set the type to turbulence. And then if I toggle the input here, I'm going to change this from object to UV. I'm going to give it some scaling, and I'm going to look through this material. And I have a shelf tool for like automatically piping it into the surface. I'll probably share that on my Gumroad. And then I've set a shortcut that automatically triggers that shelf tool. So I'm going to lock the camera and just zoom in a bit. I think I remapped this with a ramp parameter, or RS ramp, I should say. And I think I lowered this to 0.33. And then if we look here, yeah, we can see that it's a little bit, we have some detail in the shader. So we can reuse this noise, create another ramp, and then I'm going to create a bump map. I'm going to lower it. Maybe something like 0.001 is cool. And then I think in my final rendering, I also added some subsurface, so we can do that. So I'm going to create a color correct node because I don't want exactly the same color as the diffuse. So for the subsurface color, I changed the gamma to 1.25. So this will go into the ms_color. You can see here that now this parameter gets grayed out because we've connected this input. So I had that, and then I had another one set to 1.5, and I think I plugged this into the ms radius. Yeah. And then we can up the weight, so I set it to 0.6, and now the scale is way too high, so I'm going to lower it to 0.1 maybe. No, we need to go way further down, so 0.005 is a good balance, I think. And then I think I set my IR to 1.45, not that it makes a big difference really. And that was my final shader. So yeah, super simple, but obviously the intent here wasn't to make the best shader, it's more to just show you how you can import attributes and, you know, that it's kind of a similar workflow as you're used to in Cinema 4D. All right, cool. So let's hop up back to the object level, and it'd be cool if we had some like background, because now it's just pure black. So one way you can add a background is by going to your camera and then to the background tab here. And then if you enable background, you can load a texture or an image. You can also fetch images straight from Houdini. So you can create a COPNet, and this is a new network that we haven't gone into really, but it's Houdini's compositing network essentially. So it's like a nuke light, if you can imagine that. So we're gonna hop in, and here we can just create a ramp RGB. So now we have a ramp. I'm gonna set it to vertical. And then we can create a null, call it outBG for background. We can hop back up. And then in here, we can reference that Copernicus texture. If we do up, and then I'm going to hit Shift W to get my tree view up again. And then we can drag this in here. Oh, that replaced it, obviously. But if we do up, column, now you can see that we've fetched that texture here. So that's one way to add a background or a gradient or whatever you want. But if I'm just doing like a simple gradient, most of the time I just like to add some geometry behind that just illuminates the objects or whatever. So I'm going to uncheck this, and then I'm going to create a new geometry network, call it render BG, change the color to green. And then I'm going to create a grid here, make it standing. I'm going to reverse it so that we get the correct facing. And then I'll want to add some UVs. We can do that with the UV unwrap. I'm going to hit my render here for a second. And then I'll add some normals. And I'll create a null called outBG. Toggle that node. head back up. And then what I do a lot of times is I just parent this grid to a camera. So now it's parented to our camera that we created. So then I can just move this backwards. And if I jump into the camera and hit play, we can see that now we have a background, but we don't have a material assigned to it yet. So we can create that. So we'll create a new material, call it BG for background. And then here we can create a ramp as well. So we'll just do something like that. Change it to something orange. And then if we head back, Shift W again to get the tree view up. And I'm going to drag this material into here. Just to be safe, I'm just going to add object parameters to this geometry as well. So now, if we move our camera around and hit render, it will always be parented to that view. So I think I moved my camera to something like this. And then we can also add another light. So now we've just been lighting this with a Ars light dome, but we can create a regular Ars light. Just drop it down here. And I personally tend to just place these lights by just jumping into the light through here. So we can pick our light. And if we lock it, now it's essentially operating as a camera. And it's much like how it would work in cinema. So I think I placed mine, maybe something like that. I don't know. You get the point. So that's one way to do it. But something that a lot of Cinema 4D artists tend to like is to be able to have like a null that they can target this light to. So we can create a null. And we can just name it target. And if I go up to this misc area here, we can change the control type from null to box. And this will just make it like a box so we can see where the null is. I'm going to scale this down a little bit so that we can see it. So now it's over there. And then if we go back to our Redshift light and go to look at options, we can drag this null into here. So now it will automatically aim towards that target. So that's how you do that. Pretty similar to how it works in cinema. But I think for a while this function didn't exist in Redshift for Houdini, so it's good to know that it's there now. Okay, so that's a very common workflow that Cinema 4D artists like to do. And you can obviously also parent this light to a null and do your transform that way. What else? Oh yeah, camera properties. So this should be the same controls as you have in cinema. So if you want to get some bokeh, you can click this bokeh icon here. And you can either use the built-in Houdini camera focus, which are available in the sampling here. But I tend to just uncheck this and use the Redshift one, and it's just because I'm used to that. And here you can also target a null for where you want the focus to be at. So I'm just going to copy this over, call this focus, and drag this in here. And now we can pick an area that we want to focus. Maybe the sphere here is fun. I'm just going to scale this display down a little bit so that we can get more accurate, like so. And then I'm going to lower the aperture. So now if I move this null around, we can control where in our scene we want our focus to be at. And this will always be locked to this null. If I move the camera around, we'll always stay in focus in that area. And then, if I'm just doing stills, sometimes I'll go in here into the post effects and just add some contrast. I usually just do a little bit of contrast. I mean, in this case, it's so saturated, so it kind of looks better without it. But sometimes you just need a little bit of a boost, so you can do that in the color controls. And obviously you can create your own S-curve if you want. Yeah, there's a lot of different effects here as well, but I won't go into that today. So once you have a frame that you feel like you're happy with, you can just go back to the out context, select your ROP, and then hit this render to disk, and it will start to render. So that's usually how I work in Houdini. There's a new context for scene assembly called the stage area, or Solaris, but I didn't want to dive into that because honestly, I'm not super familiar with it as well. But let me know in the comments if you'd like to see content on that, and I'll see what I can do. It's super powerful, but yeah, it's a completely different topic. Oh yeah, one last thing I just wanted to cover before we wrap up is how to make a camera follow a path. So I'll drop down a new camera, and the way we're going to do this is by going up to this shelf tool tab here called constraints. And here we have a shelf tool called follow path. First though, I'm just going to create a helix so that we have a path. So now when we have a path that we can constrain to, I can go up to the shelf tools and click the follow path. Now we get a message here saying, now select path object, press enter to accept selection. So I'm going to select my helix, and then while I'm hovering over the viewport, I'm going to hit return, and then we get another message. Now select a look at object, if any. So I'm gonna pick this target, and then I'm gonna press enter. And then it asks if we have a look up object, if any, but I'm just gonna hit enter to accept that selection as is. So now if we're dragging our camera, we can see that we are seemingly locked, and by default, it's already animated for us. But if you want to modify it or reanimate it, you can double click on the camera and hop in. And you can see here that we have a constraints network or a chop network. So let's jump in. And here is what this chop tool made for us. And the way you would reanimate this is by animating this position here. So I can just delete these, and then we can animate it ourselves. So we can say maybe something like this, move forward a bit, and then we can finish it off. Whoa! Yeah, not the most beautiful animation, obviously, but you get the idea. And then if we want to reframe our target, we can just move it, and then it will automatically look at that. And then if we want to organize this a bit, we can create some network boxes. So you can either select some nodes and look for a network box this way, and then you can name it. So we can name it lights, and you can change the color of this if you hit the C key. So I'm gonna pick an orange color for our lights, but you can also select, let's say you want to select these cameras. You can hit Shift O, and that will also create a network box. And then you can name it here as well.
And that's a wrap. I'm curious to know though, how do you feel about Houdini after having watched this series? Does it feel more approachable, or does it still feel overwhelming? Let me know in the comments. And if there's something specific you want me to cover next, feel free to throw that down there as well. With that said, thank you so much for watching. Like and subscribe if you want to see more, and I'll catch you on the next one.